Okay, so today we're talking about PBS Kids and going live in Australia, and we're doing the broadcast from here in the East Coast of the US. So a bit on Brklyn Media. It's a kind of a virtualized service provider that I founded just over a year ago, doing virtualized media services like playout, VOD fulfillment, and other content services, as well as distribution. So PBS Kids is a customer of mine that I've been working with for a few years now. They had an opportunity come up late spring about launching a 24/7 linear channel on Foxtel. And Foxtel is the second largest, I think, provider in Australia, and over 5 million households there. And they needed a live playout suited for their time zone. We do playout for other territories for PBS Kids as well. And the tricky thing about this one was with Foxtel, it's typical a 3-month onboarding period for VOD and for playout, but we had to get it done in about 30 days or less because an EPG slot came open, so we had to get it done fast. Kieran, do you want to, well, you already gave an intro, so everybody knows Kieran by now, I guess. So due to the short timeline, we had to, a few things to consider about how to do this. I have, it says a cloud mess archive. It's actually a MES archive of content. It is kind of messy at times. So PBS, I have all their content in a MES format sitting in the cloud, and whenever they sign a deal somewhere internationally, whether it's VOD or playout or whatnot, they just kind of give me the order and I deliver the technical solution for that for them. So with Foxtel being so far away, we had to consider a couple of alternatives, especially with the short timeline that we had. So we were looking at doing a remote playout scenario where we would put playout servers in their head ends over in Australia and manage that remotely here in New York, where our NOC is in Brooklyn. We would transfer the files across, and then schedules would go across, and everything would happen remotely. The other alternative was to actually do a local playout in New York and used fixed, so the playout servers were sitting in our DCs and in our NOC. They'd be local, and we do a fiber loop over to Australia, but we needed to do a fully diverse and redundant decoder handover, and it's SDI handover that they take right now, so it had to be fully diverse. So that option became quite expensive to do. So then alternative 3 was to do the same thing using local playout servers here in our existing infrastructure in the US, and then stream over public internet across to Sydney, which is on the other side of the world. So in the end, due to the time, we actually chose the third choice because we have a lot of other scenarios where we're using public internet for distribution, and that's what we chose to do this. So here's what the system the architecture looks like. We've got our main NOC is in Brooklyn, and we have playout infrastructure there where we do channel A, we call it. And then the second infrastructure is in a data center in Philadelphia, where we're doing the mirrored playout for the B leg for that. We'll talk more about, we chose RIST as the protocol to distribute the feeds, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. But we started off, and Sergio, I think, is presenting today as well. With his help, we started off with the libRIST, the open source code for creating a RIST sender to send that to Australia. And this is probably in May when we started the test signals, and it was easiest to use. And so we just downloaded that open source software, loaded it up on a VM instance, and started sending the feed across. Sergio is developing some other more robust, I think it's the Coral OS, which is it's a more robust version of a RIST sender that has a lot more features. And we've migrated our A leg to that already, and we'll probably migrate the B leg to that at one point in time as well. And that just gives us a lot more flexibility and a better management platform to manage the streams, because we're starting to do more and more streams like this, right? So what we're doing is we're using one ISP for the A leg and one ISP for the B leg. And even if we were in the same data center, we would still be using two ISPs for these, because I think what you'll see is that the robustness and the resiliency of these signals, if you're using dual ISP for egress and ingress, then you get a much more reliable delivery. And then at Australia, they have two head ends where we're delivering, and we're using Kieran's decoders there because we have to do SDI handover as well as OP47 handover there, which is their version of teletext, which is tricky. And that's why we chose Kieran's OBE decoders to do that, because he has lots of experience with that. And there again, they're using two ISPs in two separate locations to take the signals into their MUX. Kieran, do you want to add anything about this?
Yeah, I mean the power of RIST really shows that in this diagram, for example, in your playout centers, you could have ISP A, ISP B, and then receive. They could also have ISP A, ISP B, and in principle, we could make a very large number of combinations of cross points for if we wanted to have really, really resilient and really, really redundant across two or more ISPs at each site. I think it's 2 to the power 4 you would end up with in the end, if you really wanted to go for it. And so that really shows the power of RIST compared to other protocols, shall we say, that have 3 letters and a point to point.
Yeah, and it's been working unbelievably well. I think RIST, we didn't use it a year ago. We were using more other protocols, but as of spring this year, I think it's mature enough now and evolving rapidly now. It's really the most kind of robust delivery signal that we've used to date. So yeah, so we're going from New York and Philadelphia. I'm not sure if it's exactly going this direction or over the Pacific, but it's IP transport streams going around the world in essence, and carrying the EBU teletext as well. And we're doing it, I think we've set it to 200 milliseconds right now, but we've had ping times around 300 milliseconds, I think. So we're getting lots of recovery opportunities there, and it's been an extremely reliable method to hand them fully redundant streams going across the world, and the cost savings versus fixed fiber were just tremendous. And yeah, so why RIST? Kieran touched on this a bit. From my perspective, economics, running a business, it makes sense to do this, right? And the reliability of it is amazing. And I've had a lot of experience with internet distribution for years now, and it's just obviously everybody kind of sees it. It's becoming more and more prevalent, and it's really becoming you used to talk about satellite and fiber, and then this was kind of a something that works for tertiary platforms or whatever. But now it's satellite, it's fiber, it's public internet. And they're equally as discussed in any opportunity to do distribution these days. So the requirements were bounded end-to-end, delay, had to be high reliability. And the other thing too is that Foxtel right now, they take SDI handovers, but they're looking to migrate in the near future to a fully IP ingest method. And we're also talking with them about moving to 2022 for even a more resilient path as well. And then we personally, from Brklyn Media, we have we prefer to use as much open source software as possible running on COTS hardware. So we're a big supporter of this as well. And Kieran, do you want to add anything to why you like RIST? I think you did already, right?
I think you've covered it all, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay, great. And one of the issues that we had in this one was in Australia, they use a flavor of teletext, so to speak, where they insert it at different lines than we typically do in Europe. And I'm coming from 608, 708 land now as well, so it was even more of a trick for us. But I had worked with in a different life with Kieran in the past on Australia, and knew that he had a solution for this to do that, right? So we had to go from taking our normal 608, 708 captions and converting them into teletext, and then taking the teletext and flipping that over into the OP47. And we wanted to do that downstream at the decoder level versus doing anything, doing anything, especially with the timeline that we had. We didn't have a lot of time to kind of fiddle internally with our infrastructure here to get the OP47s coming out of our egress here in the US. And Kieran, do you want to talk about maybe your experience with Australia? And
yeah, even this week, funnily enough, Australia has its challenges. OP42, OP47. A lot of authoring equipment out there doesn't use the Australian flavor, so we had to measure and check the Australian flavor very carefully. There are issues, for example, with the checksum in OP47. A lot of equipment sends an invalid checksum, which we have to go and do things about. Timing of teletext is also a big challenge for us. We see lots of equipment not time the teletext correctly. So the teletext in the transport stream model needs to arrive within 40 milliseconds of display, but we see a lot of equipment sending it much earlier, so up to a second, 2 seconds too early, which in principle, at least for some receivers, is a problem. If you're sending to older set-top boxes that don't have the ability to buffer, that's a challenge. And yes, you've covered conversion to the US. And I guess that the time zone for debugging all these issues is challenging, probably even bigger challenge for you, Rick, to be honest. But having to test an issue, wait for Australia to come back and be happy with it, and then there's always a back and forth of plus 1 day to do everything just because of time zones.
Yeah, and literally we had probably 3 weeks between, we were working on the solution ahead of time a little bit because we knew it was coming, but literally by the time I got my deal signed to deliver, it was 3 weeks. And I think at that stage, Kieran, I hadn't even given you a PO for the decoders, nor did you have the processors in for them, which is a huge backlog in the world around that as well. So, I knew that.
I literally took it to the DHL depot. I actually took it to the wrong DHL depot. I took it to the domestic depot because it was that tight. I didn't even have time to make, by the time the servers were built and tested, we didn't even have time to make a booking for a pickup. We took it there ourselves. And then now realized don't go to that depot because it's the domestic DHL depot. Go to the international depot, which is in a different place. So that's an interesting lesson learned. But these are the things you do when you have 3 weeks notice, and it takes 4 days to ship something. So
and that's another reason why I chose OBE as well, because I knew that even though we hadn't had it fully tested and soaked, that any issue that came up, that Kieran would fix it. So lesson learned. Choose your DHL depot wisely.
Yes.
The other one is don't agree to a 3 weeks delivery. And the other one I have is don't redo the floor in your home office at the same time, probably as you're launching the channel as well. But it was one of those opportunities that came up when the EPG came open and we had to deliver. Future plans. So what we're ideally going to do, and pardon my quickness in this diagram, I'm not sure if it's right or not, but what we're looking to do is move to a full IP path, because Foxtel is, as well as using 2022 potentially to make it even a more robust and resilient delivery signal. So this is the next step for us to do this. So obviously we'll be adding ISPs and signals going into multiple signals going into the same senders and receivers, and that's kind of like hopefully within the next 6 months for sure we'll be moving in this direction. And Kieran, I don't know if you have anything to add about your plans with 2022, or you might have mentioned.
So we already support 2022 and have. I think I've given a presentation at the last VSF meeting, or possibly VidTrans remote, about it. So this is something we do. I think I showed London to New York over 2022-7 for, I think, I can't remember, was it 20 billion or however, 200 billion packets or whatever it was. So 2022-7 is really because single ISPs, both in Australia or in America could have issues, but by having 2022-7 and by supporting a protocol that supports native 2022-7, that means you can have the most superior error recovery performance possible, and not put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Yeah,
with single
we're looking forward to do that, and we're moving all of our other kind of transports, whether it's into an uplink provider or to a direct into a head end. We're moving most of those over to RIST and potentially 2022 as well, over the next 6 months to a year. I think that's it. Thanks.
All right, wonderful. Great presentation. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Rick and Kieran. Thanks again for sticking around for this.